Today's video is going to be another career talk where I'm going to compare my experience in academia versus tech. And I'm just talking about my own personal experience, so definitely consider this with a grain of salt, not necessarily something that's universally true. So when I talk about my experience, I'm talking about my experience specifically as someone coming from an economics background, and especially healthcare economics, or specifically healthcare economics. And when I talk about my time in tech, I'm specifically referring to my time in product analytics and as a product data scientist. So I'm going to talk about these two in a couple dimensions. The first dimension I'll mention is the CV process, what your resume looks like. And in my time in academia, I find the CVs very long. Every paper, every conference, every talk that you give is just on paper. So your CV ends up being kind of 3, 4+ pages. Whereas in tech, very short. My tech resumes are only just like 1 page, nothing more. And the other thing about your CV is in academia, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on prestige, what school you went to, what journal you published in, who your co-authors are, who your advisor is. Whereas in tech, like prestige, I mean, sure, you might have like 1 or 2 big name companies on your resume. I'm sure that helps. But you're often just trying to hit a lot of keywords, especially at the resume stage. We're just trying to say, hey, I have skills in, I don't know, say Python and SQL, and then some topic domain expertise. Say I know a bit about growth, about sales, about privacy, whatever the domain is. Not necessarily trying to hit very specific, I don't know, co-authors like in academia or like university names. Again, it helps, but I definitely see less prestige or less name dropping in tech compared to academia. So next topic I'll talk about is the interview process. I would say in academia it was actually quite personalized, which could be plus or minus, but personalized in the sense that they asked me about my like research history, also deep knowledge into my area of expertise, very specific domain knowledge, where it is a bit challenging because you will have to be very on top of research as well as be able to name drop the latest research from the latest authors and whatnot. It was very personalized, and as long as you're really deep in your field, that should be easy. Versus in tech, my very first tech interview, they asked absolutely nothing about me, nothing about career history, nothing about like school, education, anything like that, which was actually quite refreshing because it kind of gave everyone a fair shot. It didn't matter what your prior history was. It was a matter of can you answer the questions in the interview discussion on the spot that they gave you across all candidates. And for tech data scientists or product data scientists, basically stat and machine learning questions, case studies, as well as a behavioral interview as well. Next topic I'll talk about is the work itself. So I would say academia, the work is quite rigorous. You kind of want to dot every I, cross every T's. If there's, I don't know, 1,503 patients, for example, in your research, you report that exact number. Make sure you count for every single subject, every single patient, every single data point. Whereas in tech, I think the mantra is done is better than perfect. If you get 80% of the answer, that's good enough. If that's enough to make your product decision, you don't have to aim for 100%, which ends up slowing you down at the end of the day. In terms of like methodology at work, I would say back in academia, there was an emphasis on like clever techniques as well as like cutting edge methodologies. So coming from an econ background back in like the early 2010s, they were quite big on I don't know, regression discontinuity, maybe a little bit of difference in difference, so even that was starting to get phased out. Instrumental variables was always popular. The big picture is very into identification techniques, using clever ways to actually solve your problems. Perhaps specific to economics, but yeah, identification techniques was definitely something emphasized back in econ. Versus in tech, whatever gets the job done, to be honest. It doesn't matter what technique, as long as it answers the question and gives you a product recommendation, regardless of the technique, how new it is, how old it is. Yeah. And I think last thing I'll discuss is the audience that you're working with. So in academia, you're working with an audience of peers. So they'll know similar methodology, fellow economists, fellow healthcare economists. They'll be fairly familiar with your area, and you'll also have a lot of experts in your area as well. Versus in product analytics, often you're embedded in a product team with, say, a product manager, engineering manager, designers, researcher, whatnot. They're less data savvy, so you do have to frame your analyses in a more digestible form. Versus in academia, I can definitely get more technical and have more specific references to like other techniques or other papers, for example. So cool, that's just an overview of some differences I noticed between my time in academia versus tech. Feel free to drop some comments down below if you have any specific questions, and happy to answer.